You wake up to the sound of creaking wood. The ceiling above your head is made of crooked beams and soot. Everything slightly damp, as if even the air had been slowly simmered in fish broth. Welcome to 9th century Scandinavia. Your bed is a pile of goatskins, uncomfortable but warm. Someone is snoring on the other side of the longhouse. And you, for some reason that not even the gods can explain, are in charge of cooking today. Outside, the fog creeps along the ground like an old cat, unsure whether to come or go. The cold bites, but with elegance, nothing like starting the day with a breeze that smells of wet wood and dried fish, the official perfume of Viking civilization. You rise slowly, trying not to wake Bjorn, who's a light sleeper, with an even lighter axe. The floor creaks. A cauldron is waiting for you, suspended over extinguished embers. Inside, remnants of barley porridge that resemble medieval cement. There's also something that might be a tooth, or a rock, or an argument about the digestibility of the Nordic diet. You need to cook, but what? You open the small communal storehouse. Dried fish. Lots of dried fish. Herring, to be exact. That salty, resilient little creature sustained more Vikings than any sharp sword. They caught it in absurd quantities, dried it in the wind, and then stacked it as if they were sacred books, which, in a way, they were. After all, a well-preserved herring could last almost as long as an Icelandic saga. But you also find something curious, a small gourd with amber liquid. For preserving, says the label in scribbled runes. The smell is ... Powerful, fermented, possibly urine. Yes, the Vikings had a habit of using aged urine to tan hides, and supposedly, to preserve some foods. This, of course, is a matter of debate among archaeologists. Some say it was a common practice. Others just sigh deeply. You wisely set the gourd aside. The plan is simple: grilled herring. Maybe with a touch of wild onion you found yesterday, and aren't sure whether it's onion or nature's trap. You slice, twist, rub on some salt, and think it's not so bad. You've eaten worse at modern fast food joints. As the fish sizzles over the coals, someone approaches. It's Eirik, the oldest in the village, with hair as white as trampled snow. He looks at your cauldron and grunts something in Old Norse that sounds like interesting or disrespectful to the gods. He sits down. You offer a piece of herring. He accepts with a nod and chews slowly, as if listening to stories in the flavor. Outside, the day begins to brighten. The chickens, those stoic, ill-tempered creatures, emerge from the shed with judgmental glances. A child runs toward you with a handful of mushrooms that clearly shouldn't be touched without the supervision of a vulva Viking priestess. You realize that cooking here isn't a solitary task. It's a collective ritual, made of instinct, memory, and a dash of desperate improvisation. Ingredients are few. Spices, nearly non-existent. But there's a certain honor in making the best of what you have, even if what you have is salted fish and a suspicious root. As you stir the cauldron, your mind drifts. Who first looked at a herring and thought, this, hung for 3 days in the icy wind, will be delicious. That kind of boldness deserved more statues, or at least less scurvy. You serve the result of your morning culinary adventure to a small group. Silence, then, a murmur of approval, or maybe just resignation. Hard to tell with these people. And that's when you realize, there's something comforting in all this. The smell of smoke, the warmth of the fire, the distant sound of the sea, and that slight pride of not having killed anyone with breakfast. It's a good start, and since you're here, in this world of dried fish and uncertain soups, it might be worth sticking around. If you want to follow the rest of the story, and maybe learn to ferment your own Viking honey beer, you might want to leave a sign, a comment, an inscription on stone, or perhaps a silent complicit click on the subscribe button. But only if the spirit of Odin allows, of course. After all, this is just the beginning. You wake up earlier today. Or maybe you didn't sleep. It's hard to tell when the sun barely bothers to show up. just a cold pale light that seeps through the cracks in the wall like thin soup. Your stomach growls. Yesterday's dried fish was efficient, but not exactly inspiring. You need something more. Something that requires ... movement. Today, you're going to hunt for breakfast. Or at least pretend you know what you're doing, while holding a bow that looks like it came out of an experimental archaeology tutorial. The field around the village is covered in a thin, decorative frost, like sugar on a forgotten wedding cake. You make your way into the forest, accompanied by a young man named Astbol, whose enthusiasm is inversely proportional to his common sense. He carries a spear and sings a song about a maiden who turned into a bear, or maybe the other way around. You don't ask. The trail is narrow, the ground crunches, and there are tracks. Boars, temperamentally challenging creatures, with sharp tusks and a taste for ruining Viking picnics. The locals hunt them with wooden traps covered in leaves and hope, or with nets when they're feeling particularly optimistic. You, of course, have none of these things. Just the courage of the ignorant and a shriveled apple in your pocket, possibly useful to attract something, or to distract Askell if it all goes wrong. Along the way, you come across a bush loaded with small, bluish berries, blueberries, a true luxury, sweet, nutritious, and at least this time, recognizable. You pick as many as you can without seeming greedy. The leather pouch you store them in soon starts leaking purple juice. Your hand gets stained. You think of unintentional cave art. Farther ahead, a sound rustling leaves, breaking branches. You freeze. This is the moment. Your arrow trembles, the bow creaks, a blur runs past. It's a hare, white as winter, fast as regret. You shoot. The arrow lodges in a tree, with the dignity of a historical error. Askell claps, almost, he says, with the irritating enthusiasm of those who never try. But the hunt wasn't in vain. As you crawl to retrieve your arrow, you find something unexpected, a beehive hidden in a hollow tree. Honey. The true Viking liquid gold, used to sweeten, preserve, and of course, ferment. It also served as an antibiotic, they say, or as a reason for neighborly fights, if someone dared to steal another's hive. You stick your fingers in and pull some out, sweet, thick, a spoonful of bottled sunlight. The bees, curiously, don't care, maybe out of respect, or because they're frozen. On the way back, you and Askell discuss the day's recipe. Boars are off the menu for now. But what if you mixed the blueberries into the barley porridge, and the honey, a drizzle on top, like a gift from the gods? Maybe even cook it with a hot stone, like the elders do in rituals. Back in the village, you light the embers. Slowly and methodically, you stir the barley in the cauldron, add the mashed blueberries, and finally pour in the golden honey. The smell that rises is different, less fish, more promise. You offer the first bowl to an elderly woman, who tastes it with suspicion. Then, slowly, with a glint in her eye, she asks for more. Even Eirik, always skeptical, lets out a grunt of approval. But while everyone eats, you hear a discussion coming from the longhouse. 3 men are talking about spices, specifically the use of angelica root to preserve meats. One claims the Vikings used hops to brew beer as well. Another disagrees. According to him, hops didn't reach the north before the 12th century. The truth, lost somewhere between barrels and alcohol content. You smile. Even historical controversies feel softer with honey and blueberries in your stomach. With the cauldron empty and your fingers still stained purple, you realize that Viking survival doesn't depend solely on brute strength, but on knowing what to gather, where to look, and with whom to share it. And maybe, just maybe, on knowing when a hare is just a hare, and not a test from nature. You wake up to a rhythmic, almost ritualistic sound. Wood striking wood, guttural voices mingling with the wind. Today is the day to prepare the great communal cauldron. The village gathers around the longhouse, like any good community that still measures time in moons and bouts of collective flu. You, with your newly discovered culinary skills, and your reputation as the one who didn't poison anyone with the blueberry porridge, have been invited to help prepare the main dinner. A compliment, a test, a punishment disguised as prestige. Hard to tell, but refusing would be more dangerous than accepting. The longhouse is the heart of the village, a communal space where the fire never goes out. Not for lack of trying, but because there's always someone to revive the embers with breaths, promises, or pieces of an old broom. It's a warm, noisy place, full of smoke, lazy dogs, and exaggerated stories. The main cauldron, black and enormous, is already suspended over the fire. Inside, a bubbling broth of undefined legumes, roots sliced at dangerous angles, and a piece of meat that could very well be elk, or horse, or something less debatable. You're handed a wooden spoon, the size of a small paddle. Your mission: stir with reverence, but also with strength. Stir with the wind, says an old woman, whose eyes have seen more winters than you've had birthdays. You choose not to question her. Around you, ingredients keep arriving. Someone brings wild onions. Another tosses in a handful of flour made from ... tree bark. Yes, when times got tough, the Vikings ground the inner bark of pine trees and mixed it with rye flour. It wasn't tasty, but it was, and that was enough. As you stir the broth, a child stumbles and spills a bowl of porridge onto the dirt floor. The sound of the porridge spreading is wet and slightly comical. Everyone looks, no one laughs. Here, food is sacred, even when it looks like beige cement that smells of goat sweat. A man with an unpronounceable name, somewhere between Thorbjorn and Heish, approaches and asks if you know the recipe for ash bread. You don't. He explains proudly that you just mix water, clean wood ash, flour, and a bit of fat. Bake it on a hot stone. It gets crunky, according to him. You accept the word without questioning the spelling. Later, a debate arises between two elders about the origin of underground ovens. One swears his grandfather roasted meat in steaming holes covered with leaves. The other claims that's a late Icelandic invention. The truth, as always, dissolves in the steam rising from the cauldron. You serve the first ladle to the village matriarch. She blows on it, tastes it, and raises an eyebrow with dignity, then murmurs something between acceptable and almost flavorful. It's the Viking equivalent of a Michelin star. Dinner goes on. Stories are told. One man claims he saw a troll in the mountains. Another says the troll was his mother-in-law. No one argues. You, with a full belly and hands, still marked by the wooden spoon, feel part of something ancient, confusing, but strangely comfortable. And when the last ladle of the cauldron is scraped out, you think maybe you really do have some talent for surviving here, even without understanding half of what's being served. You wake up to a different smell in the air. Less dried fish, more ... warm charcoal and cautious hope. Today, you've decided to take on one of the greatest challenges of Viking cooking. Bread, but not just any bread. Rye bread. Dark, heavy, with the texture of a grumpy sponge and the taste of ancestral humility. It's the bread that sustains, that soaks up soups, that lasts for weeks, that, in emergencies, can double as a weapon. There's just one problem. You don't have an oven. No Viking does. At least not in the modern sense. What they have are stones, embers, and a considerable faith in the power of improvisation. You start by mixing rye flour, rough as river sand, with warm water and a pinch of salt. The texture is that of respectable mud. You need, as you've learned by watching the women of the village, who seem to turn dough into art with circular motions and a look that says, "Don't interfere." Nearby, someone begins heating flat stones over the fire. These are your baking pans. The secret, according to Eirik, is waiting for the exact moment. Not too hot, so it doesn't burn. Not too cool, so it doesn't turn into compact porridge. He pats the stone and says, like a cheek after the sauna, You pretend to understand. While you wait for the stone to reach ideal post-sauna cheek temperature, you hear stories from a time when Vikings mixed bits of tree bark, dried leaves, and even bone powder into their dough, all to make it stretch further. No one knows for sure if this was a common practice or occasional desperation. Archaeologists still argue about it, trading academic papers like symbolic spears. You form small discs of dough and carefully place them on the stones. The smell that rises is earthy, simple, comforting, as if the earth itself were trying to make pancakes. The first bread turns out rustic. The second, slightly burnt. The third, surprisingly acceptable. Someone spreads seal butter on top, a delicacy that, despite everything, exists. It tastes like ocean, fat, and bravery. You share the breads with your fireside neighbors. They eat slowly, with the solemnity of a ritual. A woman even closes her eyes. Another dips his bread into last night's stew, testing rye bread spoon capabilities. It works. Between bites, yet another controversy surfaces. Underground ovens. Some say they were used only for ceremonies. Others claim they were part of daily life in Norway's mountainous regions. The archaeological evidence is scarce, and when ashes are involved, everything becomes speculation. You, pragmatically, accept that the hot stone is enough for today. At the end of the day, you wrap one loaf in linen. It will be your breakfast tomorrow, or your pillow. Or, in case of attack, your projectile. Cooking like a Viking, you realize, isn't about flavor. It's about endurance. About creating something that withstands time, cold, and hunger. And also, occasionally, something that fits well in a bowl of soup. The day begins with a heavy knock at the longhouse door. 3 spaced-out thuds, like someone with both time and authority. When you open it, there he is, a messenger from the village chief, wearing a wool tunic with more holes than fabric, and a smile that says, "I didn't make this decision." The news is clear, dry, and as inevitable as winter. You've been chosen to cook at the chief's banquet tonight. In 9th century Scandinavia, that's a great mark of honor, or a very elegant way to see if you can survive under pressure. You make your way to the chief's hall, a larger, more ornate building with serpent carvings on the columns, and the smell of hot grease soaked into the walls. Svein Barleybeard, the local leader, waits for you seated on a carved wooden throne, draped in furs and surrounded by dogs, mugs, and 3 sons who look like smaller and hungrier versions of himself. Svein says little. He points to the space by the fire and simply says, "Make food that reminds the gods why they haven't drowned us yet." A compliment, a challenge. You prefer not to ask. The banquet is not just a dinner. It's ritual. It's politics. It's theater. It's where deals are sealed, glorious lies are told, and drinking continues until everyone forgets that tomorrow starts all over again. You need to make something special, something that impresses drunk Vikings and ancestral spirits at the same time. You review the available ingredients: barley, salted mutton, deformed turnips, wild onions, honey, bear fat, yes bear, and a sack of ram testicles, apparently a delicacy reserved for truly special occasions. Yes, you're going to cook that. With a slight touch of panic, in preparation, you choose a recipe you heard from the village women. A thick stew, slowly cooked with chopped meat, turnips browned in fat, and a honey and herb reduction to balance the salty flavor. The testicles, of course, are boiled separately and then grilled over the coals, served as a prestige appetizer. As you stir the stew, you hear the elders arguing. There's an obscure cultural curiosity about ritual banquets in some regions. They buried cuts of meat for weeks before serving, as a form of fermented tenderizing. Was this common practice or just poetic exaggeration by chroniclers? As with everything in Viking life, the answer is, no one really knows. By evening, guests begin to arrive. Warriors, merchants, drunken poets. All take their seats under the smoke-covered roof, The banquet begins with mugs of mead, toasts to the ancestors, and a collective roar that echoes like restrained thunder. You serve. First, the testicles arranged on toasted cabbage leaves, as if that disguises anything. Then, the stew. Each bowl is delivered with reverence and mentally crossed fingers. And then, silence. The chief tastes, chews, looks at you, chews again. And then, like an Olympic judge of Norse cuisine, he lets out a deep grunt. A sound that could mean acceptable, edible, or I'll let you live another day. Then he repeats, more. The banquet goes on for hours. Stories are told. A warrior says he killed 2 Saxons with a wooden spoon. Another claims he saw an elf stealing butter. Everyone laughs, eats, drinks, and no one dies of indigestion. You survive your greatest culinary challenge, and are now officially known as the one who didn't burn the chief's testicles. Not bad for someone who just yesterday was still confusing nettle with parsley. The banquet passed like a greasy dream, full of laughter, stories, and a mild indigestion that makes you question the wisdom of frying certain organs. But the next day shows no mercy. The chief, impressed by your gastronomic bravery, decides that you should lead the gathering of ingredients for the village's next food cycle. You, of course, fake enthusiasm. But you know this means going into the forest. And not by the beaten path. You leave at dawn, accompanied by 3 figures of questionable reliability. Freydis, who swears she can talk to squirrels. Tormod, who once mistook a poisonous root for ginger, and a mute boy who carries a bag made of pelts, stitched with what looks like human hair. The forest is damp, alive, silent. The kind of place where moss has more personality than the villagers. You're in search of edible things. But what's edible here? Freydis points to a creeping plant with small leaves. Risotto lichen, she says confidently. You decide not to correct her. Tormod digs up a dark, twisted root. Good for soup, he assures. Then whispers, I think. You find mosses with sponge-like textures, mushrooms that glow faintly, always a bad sign, and roots that snap like glass. At one point, you find something that looks like a tiny, furry turnip. Freydis taps it with her knife. Alive, she murmurs. You leave it where it is, but you also find treasures. Caraway seeds, sweet-smelling herbs, pine bark with soft inner layers, traditionally used during times of famine. There are records of Vikings making soups with this part of the bark, boiled until it became a thick broth. It was nutritious, not exactly tasty, but it kept people standing. The use was so common that in certain archaeological sites, pieces of bark were found next to human bones, silent witnesses to a bad winter. At the end of the day, you return to the village with a sack full of things that might be food. Maybe the children gather around, curious. One boy asks, is that for eating, or for putting on wounds? You answer, depends how long you've been hungry. Back in the kitchen, you begin to experiment. You boil the roots, roast the moss, fry the leaves. The smell is ... vegetal, strong, like a field trying to tell its story through your nose. You make a soup, shave pine bark on top. Add a touch of fat for body. Serve in small bowls, with a slice of bread as an anchor. The first tasters grimace. Then, silence. Then, a nod. Not of pleasure, but of acceptance. Could be worse, says Eirik, with a smile that's almost a compliment. As everyone eats, another debate arises at the communal table. Did the Vikings eat seaweed, or just use it to wrap fish? Some say it was famine food. Others, a ceremonial dish. Archaeology, divided. No one knows for sure whether seaweed was treated as an ingredient or a last resort. You drink the last sip of the mysterious soup, and think. Sometimes, cooking here is like making poetry out of charcoal and salt. And, surprisingly, it works. Today is a day to go to the sea. Not to sail, nor to poetically meditate while staring at the horizon. That's for poets, or for those who've already lost 3 frozen fingers, and need an existential break. You're going to the sea to preserve fish. Yes, because fresh fish here is like a campaign promise. It doesn't last, stinks fast, and requires care to avoid poisoning everyone. The Vikings knew this, and you're about to find out how. You descend along stone paths to the cove where beached boats dry in the wind. The air has that penetrating and comforting smell of sea spray, dead fish, and salt. Lots of salt. You'll soon find that, to a Viking, preserving isn't just storing, it's turning into a monument. The first task is simple: gutting the fish. The more accurate verb would be fighting the fish, since it seems to have been frozen with hostile intentions. You cut, remove the guts, and toss them to the gulls, who screech as if they're judging every decision you've ever made. With the fish cleaned, you move on to the salt. Generous handfuls are rubbed over each fillet, like a rigorous massage from someone who hates your spine. Then, they're hung on wooden rods exposed to the cold wind. The salt draws out the moisture. The air does the rest. In a few days, they'll be hard, resilient, and edible. Probably. Eirik approaches and comments. Ever seen fish intestine used as rope? You pause. He continues. More elasticity than hemp rope. Doesn't last as long, but stretches more. You're not sure if you're more impressed or regretful for having asked. During the process, the elders debate, as always. Today's topic: did the Vikings use brine barrels or bury fish in salty sand? The evidence is conflicting. Some archaeologists support the barrel method, others believe in covered pits. No one knows for sure, but everyone agrees the smell is unforgettable. You try the brining technique, a large container with water, salt, and some aromatic herbs that honestly only partially mask the odor. After soaking the fish for hours, it comes out firm, translucent, and still smelly. But now, it's a respectable smell. At the end of the day, you stack the cured fish, proud. A food that can last weeks, even months, if no one drops it. Or if the rats aren't smarter. Before bed, you bite into a piece. It's salty, very salty. A slap on the tongue, followed by a sigh. But there's something ancestral in it. Something that says, we survived today too. And as the waves crash against the rocks, you think there's beauty, even in the act of salting fish. A kind of salty alchemy between sea, wind, and time. Waking up early in a Viking village isn't a choice. It's a consequence. Today, the longhouse is already in motion, before the first ray of sunlight. Warriors are preparing to depart. A trade expedition, or perhaps a light raid. The difference, it seems, depends on point of view, and the presence of Christian chroniclers. You, of course, won't be fighting. But you have a noble mission, preparing the travel rations. Portable food, durable, and tough enough to survive 3 weeks on a boat with 50 men, 1 barrel of mead, and no soap. The requirements are simple. Food that won't spoil, doesn't weigh much, and doesn't require fire. And so your day begins with a pile of barley, dried meat, frozen fat, and something you can only describe as a resentful biscuit. First task: remake the famous hard bread, a barley, flour, and salt cracker, baked until it reaches the texture of a roof tile. You knead the mix with water, flatten it, pierce it with a piece of bone because of course there's no rolling pin, and bake it on a hot stone. The result: discs as hard as summer promises. Then comes the Viking energy super combo: dried meat and melted fat, mixed with a bit of crushed grains and shaped into balls. The texture: soft inside, crunchy outside. If you're optimistic, it's called portable soup by some, food mistake by others. But it works. It nourishes. It lasts weeks without molding, which is practically medieval magic. You also prepare a concentrated broth with meat scraps, salt, and coagulated blood. You boil it down into a thick paste, which can be rehydrated later with hot water. Someone approaches and asks, "Got blood soup?" You reply, "Yes. Compact." He smiles. That's a compliment, apparently. In the corner of the house, an older Viking shares a story. Once, he took suet bread on a trip to Ireland. It lasted the whole journey. Only got soft when it fell into the water. Another claims he ate the same bread twice, once in Norway, and again when he vomited it near Scotland. They laugh, drunk, happy. Amid the stories, a local academic controversy arises. What exactly was the composition of Panis Nordicus, or Viking war bread? Some modern scholars try to recreate it with similar ingredients. Others say it was a random mix of everything not yet rotten. No one knows. And maybe no one ever will. But everyone agrees, if you try to break one of those breads on your knee, it's your knee that breaks. By the end of the morning, you pack the food into leather parcels. The warriors test them, approve with grunts and handshakes that nearly dislocate your shoulder. A woman named Irsa gives you a wooden necklace in thanks. Good food is a talisman, she says. The boat departs. The men take their spears, their stories, and their rations. You watch from the shore, flour up to your elbows, and a quiet pride in your heart. Because deep down, cooking for Viking warriors is more than feeding. It's preparing compact courage, in the form of hard biscuit and dried soup. You wake up with a headache that isn't yours. It belongs to the whole village, which can only mean one thing. Last night was a mead night. The hall still smells of sweet, honey-fermented drink, collective sweat, and a faint memory of an argument about who is a direct descendant of Thor. You trip over 3 bodies, snoring under the table. One of them is hugging a barrel. The barrel snores too. Today your task is to understand, and if you dare take part in the production of Viking beverages, specifically barley beer and the famed mead, both fermented, both dangerous. Both, according to local tradition, capable of calming gods or starting wars. You begin with the mead. Pure honey, water, and time. Sounds simple, until you remember that controlling fermentation without a thermometer is like trying to tame a bear with a dried fish. The honey is diluted in warm water. Then natural yeast is added. Microorganisms that live on the wood of the barrel, on the fingers of the elder in charge, and possibly in the air. Everyone breathes. Freydis approaches, smiling with that gleam in her eyes that usually precedes dangerous ideas. Want to try mushroom mead? She asks, already tossing a handful of dried fungi into the mix. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. After all, some say Vikings used psychoactive substances in rituals, a practice debated by historians, dismissed by some, adored by others. As for the beer, the beer. It's made with malted barley, cooked until it releases sugars. The liquid is then cooled, fermented in barrels darkened by time and the smoke of the longhouse. The controversy of the day revolves around hops. Someone insists Vikings used it. Another claims hops arrived too late. A third, already half drunk, says the only thing that matters is whether you can fight after drinking it. You try a cup. The beer is cloudy, warm, and dense, with a flavor that mixes barley, wood, and something slightly citrusy, like fresh regret. The mead, on the other hand, is sweet and treacherous. You drink slowly. The world spins slowly. The floor feels optional. And then, the first fight begins. 2 men argue over a piece of cheese. No one knows the origin of swords are not drawn, which is a good sign, but shields are used as makeshift trays. A woman throws a turnip with surgical precision. It all ends in laughter and another round. You watch, half dizzy, half fascinated. Drinking here is more than intoxication. It's remembering. Forgetting. Belonging. Telling stories that never happened with the same intensity as the ones that happened too much. And when night falls and the barrels are empty, you lie beneath the bench, your head spinning and the taste of the past in your mouth, and you think, maybe this is what they call tradition. Autumn tightens like a poorly sewn coat. The light dwindles slowly. The winds now cut more than they caress, and the barley stalk, Well, let's just say the rats are eating better than we are. In the longhouse, the fire never goes out. Not out of tradition, but because letting it die would be surrender. And surrender, around here, is worse than starving. You notice the signs as soon as you wake. Silence, not the respectful kind, but the tense, measured kind, full of avoided glances and half-empty bowls. The barrels of dried fish are deflated. The grain sacks seem to have been emptied by gluttonous ghosts. There are crumbs where there was flour, promises where there was bread. You get up and find Eirik at the edge of the makeshift stove. He stares at boiling water and says, in a tired voice, "Wind soup today," with a pinch of memory. He smiles, but his eyes don't follow. Hunger in Viking times isn't just about appetite. It's a test of endurance, of ingenuity, and for many, of faith. It's when the village looks to the sky and remembers the gods more often. Not out of devotion, but for lack of better options. You decide to do something. You scour what's left in the pantry. A sack of flour mixed with ash, no joke. A pot of rancid fat, and something that might be an onion, or just a bulb with an identity crisis. The plan: make emergency bread. Mix it all, knead it, bake it directly over the embers. Smoke rises, smell indescribable. Color, medieval gray. Outside, people gather. An improvised ceremony in the stone circle. There are no hymns, no chants, just eyes looking up and hands outstretched. Some carry offerings, simple necklaces, smooth stones, pieces of food that could be a last meal or a first sacrifice. The connection between religious rituals and poor harvests has always existed in the Viking world. Though historians still debate it, with gusto and ambiguity, were sacrifices a real response to hunger, or just symbolic reinforcement? Hard to say. Archaeology shows altars with animal bones, sometimes human, but the tales are full of exaggerations. Maybe not even they knew what was history and what was excuse. You watch the ceremony from a distance, holding your freshly baked ash bread. A boy approaches. He's thin, eyes sunken, but smiles. You share the bread with him. He chews slowly. "It's good," he says, lying with his mouth full. You thank him with a serious nod. That's how you show gratitude for something valuable in times of scarcity. Later, in the longhouse, someone shares a forgotten recipe. Bread made with ground bones. Yes, bones. Roasted, crushed, mixed with flour. A custom recorded in obscure chronicles and confirmed by some remains found in archaeological sites. Desperation food, but still food. You consider trying it. After all, there's a barrel of bones near the stable. But you decide to wait another day. There's still fat, still nettles, still faith. And it's curious how, even in hunger, Viking cooking persists. They still try to add flavor. Still stir the cauldron with hope. Still cook for more than one. At night, the fire crackles low. You lie down with a semi-full belly and a heart in suspense. Outside, stars appear through the clouds like holes in an old tapestry. You close your eyes and think, if it snows tomorrow, it'll be beautiful and terrible, like everything here. But if the sun comes, maybe there'll be something to hunt. Maybe the onion will reveal its identity. Maybe the gods are listening, or maybe not, but still, it's worth trying. You wake to the sound of strange voices. Languages that stumble over syllables, gestures to broad laughter that doesn't belong to the village's routine. The merchants have arrived. Heavy cargo boats dock in the cove, with sails stained by distance and amphorae full of possibilities. Today is trade day, and for a Viking, that means more than metals and fabrics. It means spices. Flavors that don't grow here, that come from lands where the sun takes longer to leave. Flavors that carry the mystery of places with long names and maps, still drawn by myths. You walk among the makeshift tents, set up in the main yard. Men and women sell things that seem absurd to local eyes. Pottery too delicate to survive winter. fabrics that seem made of wind, and spices, those grains, powders, and leaves that promise to turn porridge into miracles. A dark-skinned merchant with a braided beard offers something he calls dried coriander. You sniff. The aroma is sweet, earthy, exotic. Another woman, with short hair and a calculating gaze, presents small packets with pepper, saffron, and a reddish powder she calls cinnamon. And there comes the dilemma. Is it really cinnamon? Scholars of future centuries still debate this. Some claim Vikings accessed real cinnamon through Arab trade routes. Others believe it was a local bark with a borrowed name. The doubt remains aromatic. You trade 2 fox pelts for a handful of coriander and a pouch of dark salt from Ireland. Then you find a traveling cook who demonstrates how to use coriander in a fish stew. You watch, learn, and already begin imagining how it could rescue the village's sad porrages. Back in the longhouse kitchen, you decide to experiment. You make a simple broth with fish, onion, a bit of barley, and a pinch of the mysterious coriander. The aroma rising from the cauldron is ... new. Not better, not worse, just different. A scent that doesn't belong to the north, but is now here. You taste, warm, smooth, with a sweet note at the end that leaves the tongue curious. When you serve, the reaction is immediate. People frown. The first sip comes with suspicion. The second, with surprise. The third, with a respectful comment. Doesn't taste like poison. Freitas licks her lips and says, tastes like something that didn't rot. I like it. It's a compliment. You accept. During the meal, Eirik shares stories of old trades, of when his mother traded a flask of honey for a blue stone that glowed for 7 nights, of when a warrior returned from Byzantium with olive oil and had no idea it wasn't meant for sword polishing. Trade brought more than flavor. It brought culture, myths, intrigue. Coriander is just one among dozens of little revolutions. A spice that entered both the soup and the vocabulary. In the corner of the house, 2 elders argue, of course. One claims cumin was more used than pepper. The other says cumin is a stuck-up Saxon invention. No one has proof. Everyone has convictions. At night, you store the spice packets as if protecting relics. They are fragile, aromatic, and full of promise. You think of how a simple grain can cross seas, change recipes, soften winters, and deep down, you feel something close to hope, because maybe the world out there, vast unknown, salty, and fragrant, still has much to offer, and it all begins with a handful of spice tossed into the right pot. The dawn sneaks in with shades of copper and ice. In the longhouse, silence is broken by precise sounds. Knife on wood, water boiling on stones, measured steps between embers and pots. Today you spend the day in the kitchen that truly sustains the village, not the one for banquets, nor for warriors, but the one run by women. It's Freitas who invites you, with a simple gesture and a short phrase. Today, you learn for real. And you follow, curious, into a part of Viking life that rarely appears in heroic sagas. The invisible, but absolute domain of the everyday kitchen. The space is smaller, more organized, without the glorious chaos of feasts. Pots aligned. Cloths hung to dry. Clay jars full of roots already identified, and others with the implicit warning of best not to touch. The women move in an unchoreographed dance. One grates crooked carrots. Another grinds seeds in a stone mortar. A third tends to a soup that bubbles unhurriedly, as if it knows nothing. Good comes fast. You start peeling turnips. The task is simple, repetitive, almost meditative. And, curiously, it makes you listen more. Fragmented stories, whispered secrets, jokes that would make a warrior blush. Here, among furs, pots, and smoke, they talk about real life, about births, losses, times when food was just one of many daily miracles required. You learn tricks, how to boil nettles to remove the bitterness, how to use seal fat to preserve roots longer, how to make a salve with wild garlic and honey, used both for wounds and to repel unwanted suitors. And, perhaps most surprisingly, how to prepare a cosmetic from animal fat and charcoal. Freitas shows you, laughing. If your face is too clean, they get suspicious. Viking aesthetics, it seems, valued the expression of survival. During a break, the conversation turns, as it always does, to the role of women in ancient times. Some claim they were merely housekeepers, others that they held real power, as merchants, healers, even warriors. The truth, slippery, fragmented, too dependent on sources written by men more interested in praising swords than spoons. But one thing is clear. Without them, no one would eat, or live long enough to tell any story. You're invited to help prepare a special dish: oatmeal porridge with goat's milk, honey, and toasted seeds. Simple, nutritious, almost festive. You stir slowly, under the watchful eyes of 3 women seated around the embers. They say nothing, but the silence is full of invisible instructions. When you serve, you receive a nod, then a smile. Small gestures that, here, carry the weight of titles. Later, as you wash your hands in a bucket with birch leaves, one of the women approaches. Her name is Astrid. She has calloused hands and serene eyes. She says, "Cooking is our weapon. Subtle, precise, daily." And you suddenly understand that not all wars require shouting. Before leaving, you take one last look around. The embers still burn, the soup still simmers, and the silence is comfortable. Because there, in the space where the everyday is crafted with spoon and courage, lies the true backbone of Viking life. You take a deep breath and feel gratitude. The cold has arrived in full, no longer in icy whispers, but in firm, cutting gusts that slice through clothes, furs, and certainty. Snow asserts itself over everything: rooftops, trails, silences, and with it comes the urgency of the winter feast. Today you don't cook to satisfy today's hunger. You cook to trick the hunger of tomorrow, of next month, of the time when the sun will forget how to rise properly. You wake to the sound of barrels being dragged. The central yard is tense, methodical in its movement. The last autumn hunts have been hung. The salted and dried fish are stacked like firewood. The grains have been counted, measured, divided with mathematical precision. Any mistake could mean a slow death, and yet the feast will happen. Because winter isn't just for enduring. It's also for remembering that you made it this far, that it's worth going on, and that it's still possible to laugh, even when your fingers no longer feel their own touch. You're in charge of preparing the fat. Yes, the fat. Not as an ingredient, but as the main dish. A carefully kept barrel was opened this morning. Whale fat, bear fat, goat fat, different textures, smells, challenging, but each spoonful is pure energy, stored like a relic. You mix it with barley, boil it until it becomes a glossy, porridge-like substance, then pour it into clay molds to cool. The children call it full belly stone. It's the kind of thing you eat and then sleep for 3 days. Nearby, others prepare game meat with dried berries and caraway. Turnips are buried under embers. And there is bread, of course, the dark, dense kind, with a crust of time and the taste of survival. Some still hold on to slices of fermented fish, an aroma that makes the nose reconsider its job. While stirring a cauldron, Eirik says his grandmother used to claim certain foods warm the soul, a concept many historians treat with skepticism. Did the Vikings attribute spiritual properties to bone broth? Perhaps. Or maybe it was just a way to give meaning to a hot meal in the middle of the white void. The feast takes place around the large fire. Everyone gathered, leaning on one another, sharing bowls, pieces of bread, sips of strong drink, and promises that spring will come. Someone sings, another weeps, and no one finds it strange. You distribute your barley fat porridge. It's received with silent reverence. A father blows on a spoon for his daughter. An old man closes his eyes as he swallows. A woman lifts her bowl to the sky before tasting. And then, as if following an ancient choreography, everyone pauses. For one brief moment, there's only the crackle of the fire and the sound of snow on the roof. The winter feast, more than any other, is made of silence. You watch and understand. There's something deeply human in cooking at the edge of the white abyss, in boiling a cauldron like casting a spell against hunger, in sharing down to the last bone like weaving an invisible thread of collective survival. At the end, when the embers fade and frost once again coats the window edges, you store the last mold of fat in a wooden box. A reserve, a symbol, a small reminder that the hunger is still out there, but so are you. The cold still reigns, but something in the air has shifted. Not warmth, still non-existent, but a kind of lightness, as if even the snow is beginning to tire of itself. The days are a little longer now, and the smiles a little easier. It's time to look back, and, incredibly, to look ahead as well. Today, you visit the neighboring village, accompanying a trading group. The idea is simple. Bring what's left of winter, and see if there's anything interesting over there. What you find, however, is more than rye and goat hooves. You find, an oven. Yes, an oven. Small, built from stacked stones, covered with clay hardened by time. A woman is baking something that gives off a sweet and sour aroma. Bread with dried fruit, she says proudly. My great-grandmother's recipe. She heard it from a Saxon merchant, who heard it from a French nun, who dreamed of an angel who liked raisins. You taste it, it's surprisingly familiar. There's something in it that transcends time. A mix of timid sweetness with the rustic quality you know so well. And you begin to understand. Flavors travel, they change, but they carry memories. In the following days, you start paying closer attention to meals, and you realize Viking food left roots, literal and figurative. Rye bread survived, barley too. The use of dried fish still exists in parts of Norway. And believe it or not, blood jelly, called blodklubb, is still prepared by some Scandinavian families. A legacy that endures, perhaps out of taste, perhaps out of ancestral stubbornness. You talk to Eirik about all this. He listens, chewing on a piece of hard bread, and says, flavor changes, hunger too, but the will to keep going. That never does, and so you begin experimenting, mixing foreign coriander into local porridge, adding honey to black bread, trying a fish broth with a touch of caraway, and why not? A pinch of something no one here can name, but everyone approves of. You begin to understand that cooking, here, was never about pleasure. It was about presence. About making time pass in a bearable way. About turning survival into routine, and routine into ritual. And rituals, as we know, leave marks. By late afternoon you look at your hands, calloused, marked with small scars from knives and heat, and realize these are hands that cooked history. Hands that held time, one spoonful at a time. And still, there is so much we don't know. So many archaeological doubts that linger, like steam that won't lift. Was war bread really made with ashes? Did mead have mushrooms, or was that just bardic bravado? And the so-called Viking cinnamon, was it real cinnamon, or christened oak bark? The real answer may never come, but the taste that survives. You return to your longhouse at dusk, the sky clear, the stars sharp, the hearth crackles. You stir another pot, out of habit, out of need, out of comfort. And you think, the past has flavor. And sometimes, it tastes surprisingly like the present. The snow melts slowly, like an old man saying goodbye without hurry. Paths begin to reappear beneath the worn white. Rooftops drip in silence, and the wood, soaked with winter, finally breathes again. Today, no one asks you to cook. There's no fish to salt, no bread to knead, no porridge to thicken. The cauldron is clean, the knives resting, and you sit. For the first time in a long while, you simply sit. In front of you, a small wooden cup. Inside, a sip of mead, left over from some forgotten celebration. You raise the cup with the solemnity of someone who has lived through all the seasons, all the stews, all the hard and sweet breads of this Nordic life. The liquid is warm, slightly thick. It tastes of aged honey, smoke, and history. And you drink slowly, as if each drop were made of memories. The herring you salted, the bread that broke teeth, the chief's banquet testicles, the mead mushroom, and that hazy day that followed it. You close your eyes. There they are, Freitas, cleaning nettles with surgical precision. Eirik immersed in culinary theories of uncertain validity. The mute boy laughing at your blood porridge. The women of the kitchen conjuring meals like conducting rituals. There are the noisy markets, with their coriander and linguistic confusions. The long nights of black bread and promises. The cauldrons that bubbled with questionable mixes, and yet worked. Everything is there. Present, time passes slowly in this part of the world, and maybe that's why the past never truly leaves. It ferments, like mead. It deepens, and with luck, sweetens a bit. You look at the sky, light blue, with clouds like whipped milk. The birds return. The rivers flow. And you, accidental Viking, survivor of soup and salt, let yourself simply be, at peace. Because cooking like a Viking wasn't just about rediscovering forgotten recipes. It was about learning to listen. To the fire, the stomach, the silence, and in the end, realizing that resisting with a spoon in hand is as noble as with a sword. The final image is soft. The smoke rising from the hearth, the smell of wet wood, the warmth of a forgotten bowl. And, above all, the simple taste of time, thick, bitter, and, surprisingly, sweet. Good night, cook of the past. Good night, storyteller of cauldrons. Sleep well.